Everyone on the block thought it was just another quiet Tuesday morning. But by the time the clock hit 9, a crowd would be gathering, a police cruiser would be idling at the curb, and one neighbor's deepest secret would start unraveling in front of everyone. And all of it, every single spark, began with me showing up just a little too early. 30 minutes. That was all it took to trigger chaos. 30 minutes too soon, and suddenly I was being treated like a criminal in my own neighborhood. My name is Tommy. I'm a city environmental inspector. That means my job is simple: keep the air we breathe safe. I carry around a black case filled with monitoring equipment, sensors, calibrators, things most people don't even notice when I set up on their street. But that morning, when I pulled my case from the trunk, Karen, though everyone here calls her Barbara, burst out of her house like she'd just caught me burying dynamite. Her face was flushed red, her voice trembling, her eyes locked on that case like it was some kind of weapon. "What are you doing with that equipment so early?" she snapped, pointing with a shaking finger. The tone wasn't curious. It was panicked. You ever see someone react in a way that doesn't make sense, like they're not afraid of you but of what you might discover? That was Barbara. She wasn't terrified of me. She was terrified of what was inside my case. I tried to keep calm, professional. "Just setting up routine air quality monitoring, Barbara. It's official city work scheduled weeks ago." But she wasn't hearing me. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone, dialing 911 with enough drama for everyone in earshot. "There's a man with unauthorized chemical equipment," she shouted into the phone. "He's threatening our safety." Neighbors started peeking through curtains, stepping onto porches. A few even pulled out phones, recording the scene. And I couldn't help but think, why? Why was she so desperate to stop me from simply doing my job? When the first red lights from my equipment blinked, Barbara froze, completely still, like she'd just seen her worst nightmare flash on that little LCD screen. She wasn't trying to stop me because I was early. She was trying to stop me because the truth was about to pour out of her own backyard. 15 minutes later, Officer Mitchell rolled up. Calm, collected, the kind of cop who'd clearly handled his share of neighborhood disputes. Barbara rushed toward him like he was her savior. "Officer, thank God you're here. This man is using unauthorized chemical devices." Mitchell's eyes scanned my case, then me, neutral, professional. "Sir, can you explain what you're doing?" "Routine city inspection," I said, pulling up my badge, permits, and official schedule. Everything was in order, nothing secret, nothing hidden. But Barbara's desperation only grew sharper. "I don't care about permits. He shouldn't be here with that equipment," she cried. Mitchell frowned, clearly sensing the gap between her hysteria and the reality in front of him. "Ma'am, if his work is authorized, what specifically concerns you?" That question hit harder than anything else, and the truth slipped through in Barbara's silence. She wasn't afraid of me. She was afraid of what my sensors might reveal. "Would you like me to demonstrate?" I asked, lifting the lid of the case. "No," Barbara shrieked, her voice cracking with fear. "That's unnecessary." But Mitchell nodded. "Actually, yes, please do." So I set up the sensor, explaining every step while the crowd leaned closer. At first, the readings were normal, just a bit of car exhaust from the street. Then I turned the sensor toward Barbara's backyard, and that's when everything changed. The numbers spiked, not slightly, dramatically, the kind of spike that makes every inspector's stomach drop. My equipment beeped, flashing red warnings. Neighbors gasped. Mitchell's expression hardened. "Those levels aren't normal," I said quietly. Barbara went pale, completely drained of color. She looked like someone watching her worst secret crawl into the daylight. And in that moment, I realized something chilling. She hadn't called the police because I was early. She'd called because she knew exactly what my equipment would find in her yard. Everyone held their breath as the alarm on my sensor kept beeping, the screen glowing an angry red. The quiet street suddenly felt like a stage, and Barbara, our self-appointed HOA president, was at the center of it, her mask of control slipping in front of everyone. "Turn that off," she shouted, lunging toward me with trembling hands. "You have no right to test near private property." Her voice cracked, raw with panic, but the crowd had already seen it. The numbers, the spikes, the undeniable evidence on my screen. It wasn't just me anymore. Everyone watching knew something was wrong. Officer Mitchell stepped between us, calm but firm. "Ma'am, this is official equipment. If there's a contamination issue, it concerns the entire community." Barbara froze, her eyes darting toward her fence. Not the street, not my case, her fence. Like something buried there was clawing its way toward the truth. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who'd lived here longer than anyone, shuffled forward with her walker. Her voice was shaky but steady. "Officer, I've been smelling something strange from Barbara's yard for weeks now. Sweet, chemical, especially when the sun's hot." Barbara whipped her head around, glaring at her neighbor like she'd just committed treason. "Stop spreading rumors, Alina. Your memory isn't what it used to be." The cruelty in her tone made people flinch. She wasn't defending herself anymore. She was attacking, intimidating, and that was the mistake that shifted everything. Because in that moment, the neighbors began to see it. Not a misunderstood woman, not a victim of bureaucracy, but someone with something to hide. I adjusted the sensor again, pointing it closer to her fence line. The numbers climbed higher, faster. A piercing alarm echoed down the block. Parents pulled their children closer. Phones lifted into the air, capturing every second. "Those levels are dangerous," I said softly, more to myself than anyone else. "Toxic emissions well above safe residential limits." Mitchell's jaw tightened as he radioed for backup. "Dispatch, we'll need an environmental specialist at Maple Grove. Possible contamination." That one word, contamination, hung heavy in the air. You could feel the weight of it pressing down on the street. Barbara's face twisted with desperation. "This is hysteria, false readings, he's creating panic." But her protest sounded weaker with every passing second. Because when truth seeps out, it doesn't stop. It spreads, just like the chemicals in her yard. A young mother from the corner house raised her voice, her toddler clutching her leg. "My daughter, been coughing for weeks. The doctor said it was allergies, but what if it is?" The crowd stirred. Murmurs rippled across porches. Concern sharpened into anger. Barbara spun toward the woman with a cold smile that barely masked her fury. "Sarah, isn't your husband still trying for that promotion at the water department? It would be a shame if complaints like this got in the way of his career." The threat was unmistakable, sharp, calculated. And that was it, the breaking point. The crowd gasped. People who'd been silent before suddenly looked disgusted. This wasn't about community standards anymore. This was about power, about fear, about someone using their position to crush anyone who dared speak the truth. I couldn't stay silent, not anymore. "Barbara, are you seriously threatening your neighbors to cover up an environmental hazard?" My voice carried down the block. "Do you understand what you're doing?" Her eyes locked on mine, and for the first time I saw it clearly, not anger, not control, but fear. Pure, suffocating fear. Still, she doubled down. "I'm protecting our community from rumors and paranoia," she shouted, her words echoing off the houses. But every shout, every threat, every attempt to silence her neighbors was backfiring. Because now the neighbors weren't afraid of me. They weren't afraid of equipment they didn't understand. They were afraid of her. Phones kept recording. Kids were pulled inside. A father crossed his arms, his voice cutting through the tension. "Barbara, my kids play outside every day. If there's something in the air, I want to know. No threats are going to shut me up." The crowd murmured in agreement. Mitchell kept his eyes on Barbara, his hand resting near his radio, ready for whatever came next. And I'll never forget the way she looked then. Cornered, pale, her eyes darting back toward her yard like the truth was alive back there, clawing at the dirt to get out. Because here's the thing about lies. You can bury them, threaten people into silence. Pretend the problem doesn't exist, but sooner or later the truth finds a way to breathe. And on that street, in that moment, the truth was starting to choke the air. Everyone was watching Barbara now, not me. The fear in her eyes, the way her voice kept cracking, the threats she threw at neighbors who dared speak up. It all told a story louder than any censor reading. But then the siren of a second vehicle broke the uneasy silence. A white SUV with EPA markings pulled up, and out stepped Dr. Wilson, an environmental health specialist. Clipboard in one hand, portable monitors in the other. Calm, precise. the kind of professional presence that shifts an entire crowd's energy. "Good morning," he said firmly. "We received a call about toxic readings." Mitchell gestured toward me. "City inspector. His equipment picked up elevated levels near that property." Barbara immediately jumped in, her voice shrill with desperation. "False reports. He's stirring panic. These people are imagining symptoms." But Dr. Wilson didn't look at her. He looked at the crowd, at Mrs. Henderson with her walker, at the young mother clutching her toddler, at the father with folded arms glaring at Barbara like he was ready to fight for his children's safety. "Has anyone noticed unusual odors or health changes recently?" Wilson asked, his voice steady. It was like breaking a dam. "Yes," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice shaking but strong. "That sweet chemical smell, especially at night. I've lived here 40 years and I know when something isn't right." The young mother's voice broke as she spoke. "My daughter been coughing, struggling to breathe sometimes. We thought it was allergies, but now I'm not so sure." A father from across the street stepped forward. "Headaches. My wife and I both, only when the wind blows from that direction." One by one, voices rose, confessions, concerns, fear that had been swallowed for weeks suddenly spilling out. And Barbara, our strong, commanding HOA president, looked smaller with every word. "Enough," she snapped, raising her voice to drown them out. "You're all imagining things. This is nothing but hysteria." But hysteria doesn't look like mothers clutching their children in fear. It doesn't sound like decades-long residents speaking through tears, and Dr. Wilson knew it. He knelt, setting up his portable monitors, cross-checking them against my readings. The crowd leaned closer, breath held, as the screens flickered to life. And then it happened again. Red spikes, angry warnings, toxic levels surging as the sensors faced Barbara's yard. Gasps rippled across the block. The numbers didn't lie. Science didn't lie. Barbara's face went chalk white. "Doctor, these machines are faulty," she insisted, her voice almost cracking into a plea. "This is a mistake, I swear." But Wilson didn't even glance at her. He was already nodding the data, recording timestamps, coordinating with Mitchell. "These readings indicate a significant contamination event," he said firmly. "This isn't a malfunction, this is a hazard." The crowd stirred, anger rising like a wave. A woman with a stroller called out, her voice trembling. "My baby has been sick for weeks, and you knew, didn't you?" Barbara spun, her voice dripping with false authority. "Stop spreading rumors. If you keep talking, there will be consequences." The threat hung in the air, ugly and sharp, and for the first time people didn't shrink back, they stepped forward. "You threatened my wife's job," one man said angrily. "You silenced us for weeks," another neighbor added. "You put all of us in danger," shouted the father with folded arms. It was shifting. The fear no longer belonged to the neighbors. It belonged to Barbara. And you could see it in her eyes, wide, darting, calculating. She'd lost control of the story, and she knew it. Detective Rodriguez arrived then, stepping out of a dark sedan with a notepad already in hand. Her presence was different, calm, sharp, with the weight of someone used to unraveling lies. "Detective Rodriguez, Environmental Crimes Unit," she introduced herself. "I'll be documenting this case." Barbara tried to reclaim the moment, her voice high and brittle. "Detective, thank goodness you're here. These people are conspiring against me. He," she pointed at me, "is using faulty equipment to frame me." Rodriguez's eyes didn't flicker. She looked at Barbara the way a surgeon studies a tumor, calculating how deep the damage runs. "Ma'am, multiple witnesses have reported symptoms. We have independent readings confirming toxic levels. What exactly are you suggesting here?" Barbara's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Not at first, then weakly. "They're all lying, all of them." The words landed heavy. Absurd. Neighbors who had lived here for decades, parents with children, an inspector with permits and equipment, a federal specialist with cross-checked readings. All liars. The silence that followed was crushing. The only sound was my sensor still beeping, the numbers flashing higher each time the intake faced her yard. That was when Mrs. Henderson spoke again. her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Barbara, I have pictures of trucks coming to your house at night." The crowd gasped. Barbara's head snapped toward her, eyes blazing. "You don't know what you saw." But Mrs. Henderson didn't flinch this time. She wasn't afraid anymore. 40 years on this street, Barbara. I know exactly what I saw, and I saved proof." The block erupted in murmurs. Phones tilted closer. Cameras zoomed in. And Barbara froze. For the first time since this nightmare began, she had no words. Just wide, terrified eyes that betrayed everything she'd been trying to hide. Because when secrets start slipping into daylight, there's no way to bury them again. And in that moment I realized, this wasn't just about air quality anymore. This was about betrayal, about trust broken, about neighbors finally finding their voices after being silenced for too long. And Barbara, our HOA president, our self-proclaimed guardian of community standards, was about to face the truth she'd spent weeks trying to bury. Barbara stood frozen, her hands clenching and unclenching, her face locked in that pale mask of panic. But the crowd wasn't silent anymore, not after Mrs. Henderson's revelation. Neighbors leaned forward, phones raised higher, capturing every flicker of fear on Barbara's face. And then, another sound broke the heavy stillness. The rumble of a pickup truck. It pulled slowly up to the curb, the engine coughing as if it carried a burden heavier than its frame could handle. A man climbed out, mid-40s, wearing dusty work clothes, his shoulders hunched like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. His eyes darted between the police cruiser, the EPA van, and the crowd of neighbors gathered like jurors at a trial. I saw the cars," he said nervously, voice cracking as he stepped closer. "I figured it was time to tell the truth." Detective Rodriguez straightened, pen poised. "And you are?" "Mike Sullivan," he muttered, his voice weighed down with guilt. "Installer from Green Valley Landscaping. I did some work here 3 weeks ago." The name hit Barbara like a slap. Her eyes widened and she lurched forward, her voice shrill with desperation. "Mike, don't say another word. Remember our agreement." "Agreement?" Rodriguez asked sharply, eyes narrowing. Mike swallowed hard. His hands shook as he pulled out a crumpled folder from the passenger seat of his truck. "She paid me double my rate, asked me to install materials I told her were banned. I didn't want to, but she threatened to report my company if I refused." The crowd gasped. The air felt charged, electric, like lightning had just struck the block. Barbara's voice climbed higher, trembling with fury. "He's lying. He's just covering for his own mistakes." But Mike wasn't backing down. His face hardened as if shame was giving way to anger. "No, Barbara, I warned you. I told you these materials were toxic, dangerous, only legal in warehouses with ventilation systems. And you said you didn't care. You said your position as HOA president gave you the authority to do whatever you wanted." The words landed like blows. People recoiled. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Neighbors shook their heads in disbelief. Dr. Wilson looked up from his monitors, his voice grave. "If that's true, we're dealing with deliberate contamination, not an accident, not negligence, a planned violation." Barbara's mask cracked. Her voice faltered, teetering between rage and pleading. "Mike, stop, please, you'll ruin everything." But Mike's voice grew steadier, stronger, like confessing was pulling him out from under the weight of weeks of guilt. "She offered me more money when I hesitated, and when I still refused, she threatened me, said she'd make sure my business license was revoked, said she'd ruin me." Rodriguez's pen moved fast, capturing every word. "Do you have documentation of this?" Mike pulled out his phone, scrolling quickly before holding it up. Text messages, emails. She acknowledged the risks. She even told me to falsify the safety paperwork. The crowd gasped again, louder this time. Several people shouted at once. "You knew it was dangerous. You poisoned our kids for money. You threatened him too." Barbara's voice cracked as she tried to rise above the chaos. "Lies, all lies. He's just trying to save himself." But it was too late. The tide had shifted completely. The young father from earlier, his jaw clenched with fury, stepped forward. Barbara, you put poison in the ground where our kids play. You paid for it. You threatened people to cover it up. And now you're calling it lies. His voice wasn't just anger. It was heartbreak, betrayal. Mrs. Henderson raised her phone, her voice trembling but clear. I have photos of those trucks, Barbara. Trucks arriving late at night, unloading containers. Not landscaping, dumping. The crowd erupted again. People murmured angrily, shaking their heads, glaring at Barbara like she'd been unmasked as something monstrous. Detective Rodriguez flipped her notepad closed, her voice sharp with authority. Ma'am, at this point, we have independent witness testimony, electronic communication evidence, and photographic documentation of hazardous materials being installed at your request. Do you want to adjust your statement? Barbara's mouth opened, then shut. Her lips trembled, but no words came out. Her eyes darted wildly, searching the crowd, searching for someone, anyone, who might still defend her. But no one did. Because the truth was bigger now. It wasn't about me being early or a sensor spiking or even a single foul odor. It was about trust, community, health, children. Barbara had gambled all of that away and lost. Mike's voice rose again, firm now, almost defiant. I brought copies of the invoices too, payment records. She knew what she was paying for, and I've got the signatures to prove it. Rodriguez nodded slowly, her eyes locked on Barbara. This isn't a neighborhood dispute anymore. This is federal environmental crime, and the evidence is stacking fast. The crowd's anger grew hotter, sharper, voices overlapping into a storm of betrayal. Parents shouted. Elderly neighbors shook their heads in disgust. Phones captured every second, ensuring Barbara's downfall would be replayed across screens long after this day ended. And me, I stood there watching the collapse, realizing something deeper. Sometimes evil doesn't come with a mask or a stranger's face. Sometimes it's your neighbor, smiling at you in board meetings, enforcing rules about trash cans and lawns, all while burying poison beneath your feet. Barbara had built her power on fear, but now fear was turning on her. And in that moment, with witnesses, documents, and angry neighbors closing in, she wasn't the one in control anymore. She was the one cornered, exposed. And she knew it. The street was boiling with tension now, neighbors shouting, children crying, phones recording every desperate second of Barbara's unraveling. Mike's testimony hung in the air like a hammer about to fall, and Barbara knew it. Her eyes darted wildly, searching for a crack in the wall closing around her. And then she made her move. Her voice cut through the chaos, loud, sharp, trembling with a kind of manic energy. Officers, I need to report additional criminal activity. Every head snapped toward her. Even the children stopped fussing. And in the silence that followed, Barbara pointed at me with a trembling, dramatic finger. This man, she declared, her voice quivering with urgency, has been illegally dumping chemicals near my property. He's framing me. For a moment, the words didn't even register. It was too absurd, too backward, too insane to process. After everything, after Mike's confession, the photos, the sensor readings, Barbara was really trying to twist the entire nightmare back onto me. I actually laughed under my breath, shaking my head in disbelief. Are you serious? But Barbara was deadly serious. She pulled out her phone, scrolling frantically. I have photos, she cried. Containers, chemicals with his name on them. She held her screen high as though she'd just produced the smoking gun that would save her. But Mitchell stepped forward, calm, professional, his body cam already recording. He studied the photos, checked the timestamps, then lifted his gaze slowly back to Barbara. These were taken yesterday, he said evenly, at 2:03 p.m. And Barbara pressed, her voice climbing with false bravado. Mitchell raised an eyebrow. Body cam footage shows his equipment sealed all morning. His badge scans confirm he was logged into city facilities during those hours. And, he added pointedly, your own installer testified that you requested these exact chemicals. The crowd murmured, their disbelief turning into something sharper, anger. Barbara's voice grew shrill. It's a conspiracy. He's been planning this for months to destroy me because I enforce community standards. But the neighbors weren't buying it. Not anymore. Not after everything they'd heard, everything they'd seen. Rachel stepped forward then, my wife calm and steady, her voice carrying the kind of authority that cuts through noise like a blade. Barbara, my husband, was in Sacramento the week your installation happened. He has federal travel records, hotel receipts, conference documentation. You can spin whatever story you want, but the truth is documented. Barbara's face flushed red, her words stammering. Those could be fake. People forge records all the time. Detective Rodriguez's voice dripped with cold sarcasm. So now you're accusing federal agencies of fabricating travel documents to frame you for crimes your own installer just confessed to. Barbara blinked, speechless, her mouth hanging open. Mrs. Henderson, emboldened now, raised her voice from the porch. Barbara, I saw the installation from my bedroom window. Tommy wasn't even here that week. The elderly woman's words landed like stones, heavy and undeniable. You're all lying, Barbara shrieked, her voice breaking into hysteria. Every single one of you, this is a conspiracy to destroy me. It was surreal to watch, Barbara unraveling in real time, spinning fantasies where the entire block, city officials, and federal agencies were all part of a massive plot against her. And the more she spoke, the more unhinged she sounded. The young father crossed his arms, his voice cutting like a whip. Lady, you just admitted to poisoning our kids, and now you're trying to pin it on the guy who exposed you. The crowd erupted in agreement. Shouts, curses, accusations flung like stones at Barbara's crumbling fortress. She tried to stand tall, tried to wear the mask of a victim, but the weight of truth was pulling her down. I'm being targeted, she wailed, clutching her chest. Because I'm a strong leader, because I held this community to standards no one else had the courage to enforce. It was a performance, a martyr act, but nobody was clapping, nobody was fooled. Detective Rodriguez closed her notepad with a snap. Barbara, making false criminal accusations is a serious offense. What you've just done is obstruction. Every word you've spoken today is being documented. Prosecutor Williams, who had just arrived with the federal team, stepped forward, his expression one of tired contempt. And frankly, ma'am, accusing a city inspector of crimes your own installer admitted to isn't just obstruction. It's desperation. The street was silent for a beat, the only sound the steady beeping of my sensor, still screaming red warnings each time it faced Barbara's yard. And in that silence, I realized something. Barbara wasn't just corrupt, she wasn't just selfish. She was dangerous. Because a person willing to poison their neighbors, silence witnesses, and frame the innocent to save themselves will do anything. Anything. And the most terrifying part, I didn't think she was finished yet. Because when people like Barbara start losing, they don't surrender. They double down, they claw deeper. They drag everyone they can into the fire with them. And as she stood there, trembling, red-faced, spitting accusations into the air, I couldn't help but wonder, what was she going to try next? Because the way her eyes flicked toward her car, the way her fingers tightened around her phone, the way her whole body vibrated with desperation, it told me one thing. This fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. The street buzzed with anger, disbelief, betrayal, but beneath it all there was something else, a hunger. People wanted more than just denial, more than just accusations. They wanted the full truth. And that's when Rachel stepped forward, her calm presence cutting through the chaos like a blade of light through smoke. Detective, she said evenly, her voice steady but sharp, Barbara's lies don't end with chemicals. There's a financial trail, and I can prove it. Barbara's head snapped toward her, eyes widening in shock. You don't know anything about my finances, she barked, but the tremble in her voice gave her away. Rachel didn't flinch. She had spent weeks digging through HOA financial statements, months cross-checking contracts, invoices, and Barbara's personal filings. She knew exactly where the skeletons were buried. She pulled out a manila folder, thick with printed bank statements and transaction histories. Barbara's HOA salary is $2,500 a month, but her accounts show wire transfers, $5, $10, sometimes $20,000 coming from shell companies registered under landscaping and waste disposal firms. companies that don't exist outside of paper. The crowd gasped, necks craning to see. Phones zoomed in. Even Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "That's a lie," Barbara shouted, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone like a lifeline. "Fabricated documents, she's framing me." But Rachel's voice grew louder, fueled by the rising anger of everyone watching. Cross-referenced with Green Valley Landscaping, Mike's company. The same week he warned her about banned materials, Barbara received a $15,000 deposit, labeled consulting. Mike's face flushed with shame, but he nodded. She demanded I send the money as part of the job, said it was for administrative clearance. I didn't know how deep it went until now. Detective Rodriguez snatched the folder from Rachel, flipping quickly through the pages. Multiple deposits repeated over several months, routed through 3 different LLCs, her jaw tightened. This isn't negligence, this is organized fraud. The neighbors erupted in shouts, angry, horrified, betrayed all over again. "You sold us out. You took bribes while poisoning our kids. You ruined this street for money." Barbara's hands shook violently, but she tried to hold her ground. "It's not what it looks like," she cried, desperation dripping from every syllable. "Those payments were donations, consulting fees. You don't understand how much I sacrificed to protect this community." Her words hit the air like rotten fruit, empty, sour, unbelievable. Rachel stepped closer, her eyes locked on Barbara's. "Protect this community? You were protecting your bank account. You didn't just poison our air, you pocketed cash for it." And in that moment, you could feel the air shift again. The crowd wasn't just angry anymore. They were disgusted, sickened, betrayed in the deepest way possible. Prosecutor Williams cleared his throat, his tone clipped and icy. "Financial gain tied directly to environmental crimes elevates this to federal fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. Ma'am, if these documents are authentic, you're facing decades, not months, behind bars." Barbara's face went sheet white. For a second, she looked like she might faint. But then, like a cornered animal, she lashed out again. "You're all jealous," she spat, her voice shrill, desperate. "Jealous of me, of the power I built, the respect I demanded. You hated following my rules, so you all banded together to destroy me." Her words bounced off the crowd like stones against armor. Nobody was listening anymore. The evidence was too strong, the lies too obvious. Rachel's voice cut through, firm and final. "This isn't about rules, Barbara. This is about greed. You weren't protecting us. You were selling us out to the highest bidder." Barbara's breath came fast, ragged. Her hands trembled as she clutched her phone tighter, her eyes darting like a trapped animal. And that's when I realized she wasn't just afraid of prison. She was afraid of what else might come out if investigators kept digging. Because people like Barbara never have just one secret. They bury them like landmines, layer after layer, hopping no one steps on the wrong spot. And now the whole block was stepping, digging, unearthing everything she'd tried to hide. Detective Rodriguez's voice was sharp, commanding. "Barbara, based on financial evidence provided, witness testimony, and environmental readings, you are officially a suspect in federal fraud and environmental crimes. You have the right to remain." "No," Barbara screamed, cutting her off, her voice breaking. "I won't let you destroy me." Her eyes flicked to her car again. The crowd noticed. Mitchell stepped subtly to block her path, his hand on his holster. Because desperation makes people dangerous, and Barbara was drowning in it. The neighbors watched in silence as she shook, trembling between rage and collapse. She tried to speak again, her voice cracking. I did this for all of us. You don't understand. Without me, this community would fall apart." But her words rang hollow, because dignity doesn't come from control, leadership doesn't come from fear, and no one sacrifices their neighbor's health for money and calls it protection. And maybe Barbara knew that. Maybe that was why she couldn't stop trembling, because for the first time in her life, she wasn't the one writing the rules. The truth was merciless. The weight of the truth pressed down on the street like a storm cloud ready to burst. Papers rustled in Detective Rodriguez's hand, monitors still screamed red. Neighbors stared in open disbelief at the woman who had once dictated the color of their shutters and the length of their grass. And Barbara? She was shaking, visibly unraveling, her manic energy spilling into the air like sparks from frayed wires. Rodriguez's voice was steady, professional. "Barbara, based on the evidence collected, you are under federal investigation. Please place your phone on the ground and step toward me." The crowd grew silent. Everyone could feel it. The moment of truth had finally arrived. But Barbara wasn't done. She never surrendered gracefully. Her hands clutched her phone like a lifeline, her eyes darting again and again toward her car. Then, in a split second, her decision blazed across her face. She wasn't going quietly. "No," she shrieked, her voice echoing off the houses. "You'll never put me in handcuffs." And then she ran. The sound of her heels on the pavement cracked through the silence. The crowd gasped as Barbara sprinted toward her silver SUV, fumbling for her keys with frantic, shaking hands. "Barbara, stop!" Mitchell barked, charging after her. His voice carried authority, but panic laced the edges. He knew what could happen if she got that engine started. Neighbors screamed. A stroller was yanked back onto the curb. Phones jostled as people scrambled out of the way. But Barbara wasn't slowing down. She reached the door, yanking it open, fumbling inside like a woman possessed. And that's when I saw it. Not just keys in her hand, but papers. A folder thick and crammed with documents. Her last insurance policy, her last bargaining chip. "Stop the car!" Rodriguez shouted, her voice like a gunshot. Barbara slid into the seat, her face pale but her eyes wild, desperate. "You'll never take me alive!" she screamed. The engine roared. The SUV lurched forward, tires screeched against asphalt. For a heartbeat, it felt like everything slowed. The panic in the crowd, the raw fear etched across faces, the smell of burning rubber thick in the air. Mitchell lunged, slamming his hand against the hood, shouting, "Barbara, don't do this." But desperation drowns out reason. Barbara jerked the wheel, the SUV swerving dangerously close to the curb where children had stood only seconds before. Parents screamed. Neighbors pulled each other back. And then crack, a gunshot split the air. The SUV skidded, jolted violently, then slammed into a stop sign with a metallic crunch. Smoke hissed from under the hood, the front tire shredded from Mitchell's precision shot. Barbara screamed inside the car, slamming her fists against the steering wheel. "You can't do this to me. I built this neighborhood. I made you all." But no one moved to comfort her. No one stepped forward to defend her. Because the mask had been ripped away. And all that was left was a desperate woman who had poisoned her neighbors, stolen their trust, and tried to sacrifice them all to save herself. Rodriguez approached slowly, her weapon trained, her voice low and commanding. "Barbara, step out of the vehicle, hands visible." But Barbara clutched that folder like a shield, her knuckles white, her face twisted. "You don't understand. If you take me in, they'll kill me. You think I'm the villain, but I was protecting us all." The words landed strangely, half delusion, half confession. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "What do you mean, they?" Mrs. Henderson's voice trembled, the question catching everyone off guard. Barbara's eyes darted wildly, her lips trembling. For a moment it looked like she might spill another layer of the truth, something darker, something bigger. But then her voice twisted into a scream. "You'll never know, you'll never prove it." Rodriguez's patience snapped. Final warning, out of the car, now. Mitchell moved in, yanking the door open. The folder flew from Barbara's hands, scattering papers into the street. Contracts, invoices, bank slips, each one another nail in the coffin of her reputation. Neighbors stomped forward, picking up the papers, reading them aloud in horror. Toxic disposal permits, offshore accounts, payments from companies we've never heard of. The evidence was undeniable, and Barbara, dragged from the car by Mitchell and cuffed against the side, screamed into the night like a woman watching her empire burn. "You'll regret this," she howled. "All of you, you think I'm the monster, but I was the only one strong enough to keep this place together." Her words cracked with hysteria, echoing into the silence that followed. And then it was quiet. Only the soft whimpering of children, the beeping of my equipment, the low murmurs of neighbors reading through her dirty secrets. Sometimes the strongest sound is silence. The silence that falls when a tyrant loses their power. The silence that comes when truth finally settles like dust after a storm. But even as Barbara screamed, even as she was shoved into the back of the squad car, something gnawed at me, the way she had said it. If you take me in, they'll kill me. Who was she talking about? Who was they? For the first time, I realized this nightmare might not end with Barbara. Maybe she wasn't the architect of everything. Maybe she was just a pawn, a willing pawn, but a pawn all the same. And as her SUV smoked on the curb, papers scattered in the wind, and Barbara's voice faded into the distance of the squad car, one chilling thought burned in my mind. What if the real story was only just beginning? The squad car's red and blue lights pulsed across the quiet street, casting every house, every lawn, every shaken neighbor in harsh flashes of color. Barbara's screams had faded now, muffled behind glass and steel, but her shadow still lingered, heavy, bitter, unshakable. Detective Rodriguez closed the cruiser door with a firm slam, her face unreadable. The neighbors stood in a loose circle, clutching the scattered papers that had blown across the asphalt. Some cried openly. Some just stared in disbelief at the wreck of the SUV and the woman who had once lorded over their lives. Mrs. Henderson broke the silence first, her voice thin but steady. I told you I saw those trucks, but no one listened. Her words weren't bitter. They were sad. The kind of sadness that comes when you've been ignored for too long, when your voice only matters after the damage is already done. The young mother, Sarah, hugged her child tighter, tears streaking her cheeks. All this time we thought it was allergies, but it was her. She poisoned us. She poisoned our bobbies. The anger in her voice cracked into grief. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, the weight of it pressing on all of us. Because Barbara's crimes weren't abstract anymore. They had faces. They had names. They had pain carved into them. Dr. Wilson's monitors still beeped, numbers glowing red against the night. He packed them slowly, his voice heavy. The contamination is severe. It'll take weeks, maybe months, to clean this soil to make it safe again. And some effects we may never fully reverse. The neighbors murmured, horrified. Betrayal sank deeper. Barbara hadn't just broken rules, she had broken trust, broken families, broken health. Rachel stood beside me, her hand brushing mine, her voice low but fierce. We need to make sure she never gets another chance to hurt anyone again. Rodriguez nodded grimly. She won't. The financial evidence, the witness testimonies, the hazardous readings, there's no walking away from this. She'll face trial, and she'll lose. But even as those words settled like a promise, I couldn't shake what Barbara had said in her final moments of defiance. If you take me in, they'll kill me. I turned to Rodriguez. Detective, what if she wasn't working alone? Her eyes narrowed. I was thinking the same thing. She tapped the folder in her hand, pages thick with company names, wire transfers, signatures. These shell corporations don't spring up by accident. Someone built this web, someone bigger than her. The thought chilled me. Barbara wasn't just greedy. She wasn't just reckless. She was part of something larger. A network that saw neighborhoods not as communities, but as dumping grounds. Places where money mattered more than lives. And maybe Barbara thought she was untouchable. Maybe she believed her HOA presidency made her powerful enough to play their game, but tonight proved otherwise. The neighbors weren't silent anymore. Mike, still standing near his truck, stepped forward, shame heavy on his face. I should have said something earlier. I knew it was wrong. I let fear control me. Rodriguez looked at him, not unkindly. Fear silences a lot of people, but the difference is you spoke tonight. That matters. And maybe that was the quiet truth hidden in the wreckage. Fear had kept everyone in line for too long. Fear of fines, fear of retaliation, fear of being singled out. But fear only lasts until truth breaks through. The neighbors stood taller now, straighter, their voices louder. They weren't just whispering complaints on porches anymore. They were demanding answers, demanding change. Mrs. Henderson wiped her eyes. This neighborhood deserves better. No more secrets, no more tyrants. A murmur of agreement rolled through the crowd. And for the first time in what felt like forever, there was unity on that street. Not out of fear, but out of strength. Weeks later, the headlines would spread across the state. HOA president arrested for federal environmental crimes. Photos of Barbara in handcuffs would circle the news. Her fall from power would be replayed again and again, every scream, every denial, every desperate lie preserved for the world to see. But those headlines wouldn't capture the real story. Not the story of a community finding its voice. Not the story of neighbors protecting each other. Not the story of people realizing that silence is sometimes the most dangerous poison of all. I remember standing on my porch the night after her arrest, watching the EPA crews work under floodlights, digging into the poisoned soil. The air smelled cleaner already, lighter, hopeful. Rachel stood beside me, her voice soft. Sometimes it takes darkness to remind people of their light. I nodded slowly, the weight of it sinking in. She was right. The moral wasn't about Barbara. It wasn't even about me catching her lies. It was about all of them, the neighbors who finally refused to be silenced, the parents who demanded safety for their kids, the voices that rose together after years of intimidation. Because dignity doesn't always look like pride. Sometimes it looks like standing side by side when the world tries to make you small. And as the lights of the cleanup crew flickered against the houses, as the toxic soil was slowly unearthed and carried away, I knew this neighborhood had been changed forever. Barbara had tried to bury us in poison, but in the end, it was the truth that buried her. And maybe, just maybe, that was the justice we all needed. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one, the truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.